Oh, I think I was muted. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Good to see you all. Let me just find the place and we can get started. Hanan's joining. Okay, today's daf in Megilah is Chaf Zayin, I believe, right?
Correct.
And I think we'll start 3 lines from the top. Sounds like a good place to start. So, well, actually, maybe it's not a good place to start. Okay, we'll start there anyways. So we, not to summarize the whole week, but obviously we've been discussing, at least in this parak, the complicated hierarchy of Kedusha. So that if you have something that's holy and you sell it because maybe you need to sell it or because it's ruined, and you have money left over from that. So we discussed in the Mishnah what you can do with that money, right? Can you buy other things? If you sell a Torah, you can buy, well, we didn't know what, if you sell Sfarim, you can buy a Torah. So we discussed a lot of that in the Mishnah. And the last thing we discussed yesterday was the hierarchy of a Beit Knesset and a Beit Midrash, which of course is very, very important, practically speaking. And so there was a machloket yesterday as to whether the more important thing or more kadosh thing maybe was a Beit Midrash, a place where people studied, or a Beit Knesset, a place where people prayed. And we had a machloket yesterday, and the Gemara said that it seems like
We can't hear you, Ellie.
Something happened with your audio. You went very quiet.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm good now?
Yes, you are. Can
Okay, great. I'm sorry about that. I think I was playing with the AirPods. Okay.
What's the daf?
So today's daf is Chaf Zayin, 27. So we said at the end of the day yesterday, the last line, which I'm not reading again, or which I'll say out, is that it seems likely that you can use the money from a Beit Knesset, from a shul, to build a Beit Midrash, or a place to study Torah, because that's more kadosh or higher in level than a Beit Knesset. So today we try to derive it from a very interesting pasuk. Darish bar kapara, the 3rd line from the top. Said bar kapara, my dichtiv, there's a verse in the end of Melachim Bet, when unfortunately it talks about when Nebuzaradan came and burned and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. It says, Vayisrofet Beit Hashem, they burned down the house of Hashem, Bet Beit HaMelech, the house of the king, Bet Kol Batei Yerushalayim, Ve'et Kol Bayit Gadol Saraf Be'esh. So of course it's not clear what Bayit Gadol, all the big houses, you already mentioned everything. So how do you darshan this, said Bar Kapara? Beit Hashem, the house of Hashem, that's the Beit HaMikdash, of course, right? It makes sense. Beit HaMelech, that's the king's house, the palace. Eila Palterin Shamelech, that's the castle. Et Kol Batei Yerushalayim, all the houses of Jerusalem, that's Kimashma'an. What does it mean when it says et Kol Bayit Gadol Saraf Be'esh? Every Bayit Gadol, what's a Bayit Gadol? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi argued about this. So Bar Kapara is quoting this. But there was a machloka between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Chad Amar Makom Shemagadlin Bo Torah. That a Bayit Gadol means a place where you increase, where you raise, you teach Torah. So it refers to a Beit HaMidrash, a place where they taught Torah. And Chad Amar Makom Shemegadlin Bo Tfilah. One said no, it refers to a Beit Knesset. It refers to a place where you increase the tefillah, where you increase the davening. So that's a machloket in how to understand those psukim. What's it based on? Manda Amar Torah, because by Torah it says, as we quote very, very often, Dichtiv, Hashem chafetz leman tzidko, Yagdil Torah v'yadir. The Torah should make you great, should be great, not make you great, should be great. And so you see the word gadol in reference to Torah. Manda amar tefillah dichtiv, and this is a fascinating proof. It's dichtiv, it's based on the life of Elisha. It says about Elisha, Sapra na hagedulot asher asa Elisha. Tell over the gedulot, the great things that Elisha did. Now, Elisha obviously was very famous as a Navi for accomplishing all kinds of great miracles. He brought the kid back to life. He made the oil flow from the pans, right? So Elisha did these great things, but he didn't do them through Torah. He did them, Elisha da'avid birachmihu da'avid. If you recall, when Elisha did this, he always prayed, right? He asked Hashem to bring the kid back to life with the Eshet Shunamit. He asked him about the oil. And so that was through prayer. So you see, prayer is called something great. So there's basically a support for each one. That Bayit Hagadol could either be a house of prayer or a house of Torah. Says the Gemara on the second wide line, Tistayim de Rabbi Shua ben Levi hu da'amar makom shemagadlen bo Torah. It seems likely that Rabbi Shua ben Levi, as opposed to Rabbi Yochanan, right, the two who had opinions, he's the one, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who said that the pasuk of Bayit Gadol is referring to a place of Torah, not of Tefillah. Da'amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Beit HaKnesset mutar lasoto Beit HaMidrash shma mina. Rabbi Shua ben Levi was one who we quoted yesterday or earlier today, saying that a Beit HaKnesset that was sold, or a Beit HaKnesset itself, can be turned into a Beit Midrash, implying that the Kedusha of a Beit Midrash supersedes, is greater than the Beit Knesset, and therefore that's why you can increase the usage for something more Kaddish, but that's also what the Pasuk is referring to.
You can't go the other way?
I think that's how we possibly. You cannot go the other way. You're not allowed to go down in Kedusha. If you recall, luckily, we're not going to go into this because we don't do that.
And if you think it's going down or not.
Right. So I think we pass in this way, like Rabbi Shua ben Levi. It's actually not so clear, but that's one. It seems from our Gemara clearly it says twice that we pass in this way, and the Torah I think brings it this way. But the interesting thing, of course, is right. Practically speaking, all these issues are incredibly relevant in today, but also throughout history, because they constantly had to take buildings and reuse them or move or sell or there was constant questions about this. And if you recall, we talked earlier in the week about these Shivat Tovei Ha'ir, right, that you can change the Kedusha if you have like the representatives of the city, the Ma'amad Anshe Ha'ir. So there's a lot of discussion about like where exactly those principles apply. Halachically speaking, very practical discussions, even till today, right? If you have a shul in a house, or not a house, and you have a shul, can you sell it and build another shul? Can you, like all these kind of questions? But we do paskin that you can't unless you get permission from the Shivat Tovei Ha'ir. Continue the Mishnah. What about objects? Forget about the shul. What about a Torah, right? So the Mishnah said, Machru Torah, if you sell a Sefer Torah, lo yikchu sfarim. You can't use it to buy sfarim because they're a lower level of holiness. Ibaylu. Ask the Gemara today, Ma'u limkor Sefer Torah yashan nikach bo chadash. Can you, let's say you have an old Sefer Torah, it's old and people like you get new things, it's still functional, it's not ruined, but you want to buy a new one. So the question is, can you sell this old Sefer Torah and use the money to buy a new Sefer Torah, just for something that's more beautiful? Says the Gemara, what's the question? Kivan de lo mali le asur, would you say that since you're not increasing the value, right, you're not going up in Kedusha, then you shouldn't do it. Odilma kivan de leka le iluye, right? Since you can't go up in Kedusha, meaning there's no higher level than a Sefer Torah, so iluye achrina shaper dami, another highly elevated thing, meaning another Sefer Torah equivalent is good enough. So let's try to prove it from our Mishnah. Tashma. The Mishnah said, now this is a quote from our Mishnah, Avol machru Torah, if you sell a Sefer Torah, lo yikchu sfarim. You shouldn't buy sfarim, right? You shouldn't buy, Rashi understands sfarim to mean like a book of the Tanakh, right? A book of the Chumash, right? So, well, it's not so clear what he understands, but let's just say that it's not a whole Torah, but it's just a section of the Torah. So you're not allowed to do that. That implies that you can't buy Sfarim Udalo, Had Torah B'Torah Shapir Dami. That if you want to buy another Torah, it's okay to do it, right? So that if you sell your Torah, you can't buy Sfarim, implying you can buy another Sefer Torah. So that seems to prove it. It says, well, that's not the question. Matnitin the oven. Our Mishnah is talking about where you already did it, right? Let's say you sold this Torah for whatever reason. What do you do with the money that's left behind, right? So certainly then you can use that money to buy a Torah. The question we're asking is this an appropriate thing to do to begin with? Right? If someone comes up in the shul and says, our old Sefer Torah, it's just, it's too heavy, or it's not something we want to use, or we want to get a new one, put someone else's name on it. Are you allowed to do it for that reason? Which again is a very practical question, because very often people want to replace Sidurim or things like that for reasons of just aesthetics, or not necessarily because they're ruined.
Shouldn't we have the same reasoning as we had yesterday in terms of building a new shul and getting rid of the old one before?
So we're going to get into that in a second. But here, yes, so we have absolutely the same reasoning. Here it's specifically the case, again, not clear what the circumstances were, but for whatever reason, the person sold it, and we're talking about what to do with the money. But whether you're allowed to do it is the same exact question. So well, anyways, we'll keep going. We're going to get there. So says well, Tashma, let me prove it from the following Breita. The Breita says I hope everyone has the place. If not, let me know, but it's somewhere in the middle of the daf, around 15 lines down. Tashma, middle of the line. Gololin Sefer Torah b'matbechot chumashim. You can roll a Sefer Torah with the covering that you normally do for a chumash, or on top of the covering. Meaning, you have a covering for a chumash, which is a lower level. A chumash is one book of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. If you have a whole Torah, you can roll it, or you can lean it on top of the cover of the chumash. And you can put the chumashim b'matbechot niviim uktuvim. Right? You can take a chumash and roll it on top of the covering for books of Nevi'im or Ktuvim. But you can't do the opposite. Avalo Nevi'im Ktuvim matbichot chumashim. You shouldn't roll or place a book of Navi on top of a book of the chumash, because it's a lower kedusha. And the same thing is true about chumashim, the matbichot, Sefer Torah. I don't have the words, but v'lo chumashim matbichot Sefer Torah. Those are the words. So that's what the Breita says. Now, Katani Miyat, what you see from this Breita is it says that you could be gololin Sefer Torah matbichot chumashim, that you are allowed to roll and exchange, basically use the kedusha of a Sefer Torah on the kedusha of a chumash. But that implies matbichot chumashim in, matbichot Sefer Torah lo. That you can do it on top of the chumash, but not on top of another Sefer Torah, or the covering of another Sefer Torah, implying that one Sefer Torah cannot be exchanged or equal to another Sefer Torah. So then Ema Seifa, look at the next words of the Breita, where it says, which we quoted, Lo chumashim b'matbichot Sefer Torah. Implying you cannot roll a chumash on top of a cover of a Sefer Torah, implying that one Sefer Torah can be on another one. A chumash, a Torah b'Torah would be okay. Shaper dummy, that would be fine. Ela mihalak l'mashmamina. You can't prove from this case whether a Torah can be exchanged for another Torah. Meaning the question is, you can always do something of more kedusha on something of lower kedusha, but what about their equivalent kedusha? Can you exchange, in our case of selling, or in this case of rolling, can you take one and use it for the other? So it's not clear. So Tashma, so let's prove it from another Breita. The Breita says, this is also very practical, Menichen Sefer Torah Gabi Torah. You can place one Torah on top of another Torah. Let's say you're rolling it out, you're checking it, you can lean one Torah on top, literally on top of another Torah. And you can put a Torah Gabi Chumashim. You can put a Torah on top of one of the books of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And Chumashim Gabi Nevi'im Uktuvim. But again, you see the pattern, right? Avolo Nevi'im Uktuvim Gabi Chumashim. You can't place, these are all generally referring to scrolls back in their time. Some take this to also mean books nowadays, but certainly it was referring to scrolls. You can't put a scroll of the Navi onto a scroll of the Chumash. And Lo Chumashim Gabi Torah. You can't place a scroll of one of the Seder of the Chumash on top of a full Torah. So you see clearly, right, that from, at least it seems from here, that you're not allowed to, to put a Torah on top of another Torah, which implies that since it's the same level of Kedusha, you can basically exchange one for the other. Says, well, that's not a proof. Because Hanachaka Amrit, you can't, when you talk about placing it on top of that, Shani Hanachad Lo Efshar, it's impossible that you wouldn't be able to put a Torah on top of another Torah. Why? Right? How could you roll up a Torah ever? Whenever you're rolling up a Torah, one section of the cloth is laying on another section of the cloth. Right? That's by definition. One page is sitting on top of the other page. So since it's not permissible, it's mutar achanami kivnul efshar shari, and therefore certainly you can roll a Torah on top of itself or on top of another Torah. The question is, can you sell it? So Tashma. So let's bring a proof from the following thing. What does the Torah say? So what's the bright? Not the bright. What does the statement say? Tashma, the Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabba Bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said in the name of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Lo Yimkar Adam Sefer Torah Yashan Likach Bo Chadash. You shouldn't sell an old Sefer Torah in order to buy a new one. So that seems to be very clear that you can't exchange one Torah for another. Well, that's not clear at all, because maybe that's because of what Miriam said. Hata mishum pshiuta. That's what we said yesterday, is that we never trust you to say, oh, I'll sell the Torah, I'll get $10,000, and then we'll go find a new one. It might be a long time, you'll find something else to do with the money, you might not spend it for the right thing. We never trust you to sell a Torah and just have the money and then use it. But kikam minan, our question was, kigon dichativ umanach lefruke. Right? Let's say there's a Torah, it's already written. You go to the store, they got one in the window for $10,000. So the question is, we raised, new Torah costs 20 grand, let's say, right? I don't know what it costs, but let's just say it costs 20 grand. You go to the store, they have one written already. You have, the shul raises money, they come up with $10,000. So now they want to sell their old Torah to make up the money to buy the new one. And what's the question in that case? So Tashma, we still don't have an answer. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Misham Reb Meir, Ein mochrin sefer Torah. You can never sell a sefer Torah, ella, only for the following purposes: lilmod Torah, l'isa isha, to pay to learn Torah in order to support yourself. The simple understanding, which Rashi does not say, and I'm not sure why not, is that you're going to pay someone to teach you Torah. Rashi says it means that you want to learn Torah, you don't have any money for food, so you sell the sefer Torah so you can buy food, right? To support yourself while you're learning Torah, which I guess makes a little more sense with the Lisa Isha, or to marry or to get married, right? So you can only sell a Sefer Torah if you are to use the funds to support yourself while you learn Torah or embark on a marriage. So what do you see? That it's okay, right? If you can sell the Torah to learn Torah, Shema Mina, Torah b'Torah, Shapir Dami, that you can basically
were the Torahs held in private homes or these public Torahs?
It's a very, 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 very good question. The answer is that they probably have to be public Torah, and the question here is not. It's a machloket. Let me start with that. The Rush says, I think it's the Rush says that all of this applies only to a tzibor. That if you're an individual and you own books, including a Torah, you can do whatever you want with it. I mean, as kedusha, right? But you can sell it, you can use it, you can even use the money for other stuff. And this is all a question of when the community comes together and supports something. What is that money becomes kodesh, and what can happen with that money?
But then they're using the money for some guy.
Yeah, they're using it to support some charity, someone who wants to learn Torah.
Or marriage.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're supporting someone who needs it to start a family or to get a marriage.
Does it have to be used immediately, or goes into a kupat, or?
It's a good question, but it probably has to be used immediately, partly because of what we just said. We don't trust you to sell
like a dowry or something like that, for maybe to give the woman a dowry.
Maybe whatever it takes. I don't know. Or again, what Rashi says is it's to support them. So maybe they have no food to eat. So let's say a dowry. We'll say, I don't know. But so what you see from here is that Torah b'Torah shapir dami, is that you can take the Torah and use it to have someone else learn Torah, which implies you can take a Torah and buy another Torah, right? Says the word. No, that's not clear at all. Dilma shani limud. Maybe learning Torah is a whole different thing. Shahalimud mevi lidei ma'aseh. Learning Torah leads you to act on the Torah, right? But owning a Torah, as many people know, unfortunately, does not mean you're keeping the Torah, right? You can buy another Torah. It doesn't guarantee anything. So it could very well be that the rabbis, they made an exception that in order to teach someone Torah, you can sell another Torah if you need to, if you have no other source of money. But it doesn't mean you can sell a Torah in order to buy another Torah. And furthermore, well, not furthermore, but continuing, Isha, Lisa Isha, right? Isha Nami, the reason you can sell it to marry someone or to support someone who's getting married is because Lo Tohu Bara L'Shavet Yitzhara, right? We quote this pasuk in Yeshayahu all the time, that God did not create the world for nothing, for Tohu, for emptiness. It was meant to be populated, to be lived on. And so it's a fundamental value to support a family getting married. Avot Torah b'Torah lo. It's not a proof that you can just sell a Torah to buy another Torah. There's no clear, because sure, there's no clear benefit in that in terms of learning or growing. It's the same Torah. So Tanur Abanan, so we still don't have a proof. Tanur Abanan, lo yimkar adam sefer Torah, af al pi she'enu tzarich lo. Says the Braita, you should not sell a sefer Torah even if you no longer need it, right? For whatever reason, you have another one, let's say. Yeter al kain, amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, afilu ein lo ma yochal. Even a person who doesn't have what to eat, so they need the food, v'amocher sefer Torah, obito, something out there, Girsa, but some have it. They sell their sefer Torah or their child, eino ro'eh siman bracha le'olam, which does not say that you can't do it, right? Unfortunately, right? It says that you're not going to see a siman bracha with that money, which is what Rashi says. So that although it can be done, it applies like this to eat. We still really don't have an answer from our Gemara as to whether or not you can sell a Sefer Torah in order to buy another Sefer Torah. But the implication, of course, from this halacha is that you shouldn't, because even a Sefer Torah that you don't need anymore, again, because you have another one, you're not supposed to sell. So it's not clear, again, if it's your only one, but you're not supposed to. And if you do, says Rav Shimon Gamliel, you won't get a siman bracha. It doesn't mean it's prohibited. It just means you're not going to get bracha from that money.
Did they already darshan the word Adam in the pasuk?
Say that again.
Did they already darshan the word Adam
Which pasuk?
in the mission they're quoting? Lo yimkor Adam sefer Torah.
A person. I said a person.
Okay.
Person can sell Sefer Torah.
But Adam seems superfluous, right? Lo yimkor sefer Torah.
I mean, it's not uncommon in Mishnayot to use the word Adam.
All right.
I guess you're right, even if you didn't, but I don't think it's that unusual to include. Continues the Mishnah, V'chein b'motzreihem. The same thing is true about the extra money, right? Let's say we said again in the Mishnah, you sell your, whatever you can sell, you can use the extra money for, you can use those proceeds to buy, but if you have extra proceeds, the same halacha, the same kedusha applies to the extra proceeds. Amar Rava, now says Rava, this is very critical. And again, these halachot are all brought very practically, and many of the Rishonim deal extensively with how to apply them. Says Rava, lo shanu ela shemachru v'hotira. It's only the case, let's say you have a Torah, right? And you sell it or whatever, and you have extra money left over that you don't need to buy the next thing. So that's the case that money has kedusha of whatever it was that you sold it for, or whatever it's sold from. Avol gavu v'hotira mutar. But if you collect money, let's say you have a collection to build an aron. That was one of the things in the Mishnah, to build an ark, right? And you collect $10,000. It only costs $8,000 to build it. The extra money never became kodesh, because since you bought it, you collected it for that thing, but you never bought the thing with it. You can do whatever you want with that money.
Wow.
Abaya asked a question. 1 second. It says in the Mishnah, that you can only use money that was earmarked for, say, a shul, for that shul and not for anything else. That's shlo hitznu. That's if you don't make a condition. You didn't make a tanai when you built it. Well, we'll see when. You didn't make a tanai in the beginning that you're going to use the money for something else. Aval hitznu, if let's say you make a tanai, you say, we're collecting money, again, we'll see the case in a second, but you're collecting money to build a shul, let's say, and anything that's left over, or when we sell it, we're going to use for whatever we want. We can use it to buy pizza. So then, afilu leduchsusia mutar. You could even use it for duchsusia, which we'll see in a few minutes, is a non-holy use. So it says, well, hidam, what was the case where you made it tonight? Let's say you sold the shul and you had leftover money. So ikihitnu my havi. Even if you make it tonight, it's not enough. We said earlier that a tonight is not enough. You have to have the community, the Sheva Tovei Ha'ir, the 7 elders, approve of it. It must be the case where they raised money. They raised $1 million for the shul. They had $100,000 left at the end. That's, you're allowed to use the money, but only you can use the money tama de hitznu. You can only use the money because you made it tonight. But hello hitznu. Well, if you didn't make it tonight, you can't. So that implies that if you have extra money left over from a collection, unless you specifically made it tonight at the time of the collection, then extra money is not going to be used for the same thing. You're not allowed to use it. Says the Gemara, lo, the olam, we're talking about shemachru v'hotira. We're talking about a case where they sold the shul and they had leftover money after they sold the shul, and they bought another shul, and there was extra money, and they didn't have what to do with it. And Hachikama, here's what the Breita was saying. The medvar memurim that you can't use that money for anything else. Shelo hitnu shivat tovei ha'ir b'mamad anshe ha'ir. If you didn't make a t'nai in front of the 7 elders of the city, in front of the mamad of all the people in the city were invited. Avol hitnu shiva tovei ha'ir b'mamad anshe ha'ir. If you make a t'nai with the elders and the population of the city, then afilu duchsusia nami mutar would even be mutar to use the money to build a duchsusia. Now, what is this duchsusia? Amalei Abaya lahum Rabbanan. Abaya was one day walking down the street, and he bumped into some young student, or not so young. Davi misader matnita kameder of Shesha. He learned and he was misader. He ordered his mishnayot in front of Rav Shesha. And he said to this person, I keep saying young, he said to this Rabbanan, did you ever hear from Rav Sheshet what the word duchsusia means? It's in our Mishnah, right? What does it mean? Amar le, hachi amar Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet said it was a parsha de mata. It was a parsha. A parish means like a horseman, like a rider for the city. Rashi says when they had a lot of money in a city, they would hire, they'd have like a 911 kind of thing, right? They'd have a rider who was always on call in case they need to deliver a message to the king or go out someplace. So having someone available was considered to be a pretty big luxury, but I guess it was an important civil municipal thing. And so they used the money for that, meaning it's not even.
It was the first Uber.
The first Uber. That's exactly what it was. So they would pay someone to be available when they needed him, so Rashi says. Right. So again, it had nothing to do with religion. It was just a civil kind of municipal need. So they used the extra money for that as long as they made it tonight. Right.
It was an employee, not a
independent contractor. I think they're still fighting in court.
Yeah.
This is all theoretical, of course. There's never been a capital campaign where they raised more money than they needed.
Exactly. Amar Abaya, says Abaya, Hilkach, Haid Surba Mirabanan. Therefore, a student, a Talmid Chacham, to Shamala Milta Vayada Pirusha, if you ever hear something, you hear a word in the Mishnah, you don't know what it means. You don't have, an art school or Sefaria available. So the Shaila Kamei Deshchiach Kamei Rabbanan. You should ask someone who hangs out with the rabbis, someone who spends a lot of time in the Beit Midrash. Those are the people who know what they're talking. They heard it at some point. So if you ever hear something, ask someone who spent a lot of time around the Rabbanan, like I just did. Anyways, continues the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. I'm Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Reb Meir. This is, again, very practical halacha. B'nei ha'ir shalchu li'ir acheret. Let's say you're traveling, right? So you go to Pittsburgh, we're going to say. And Pasku alehem tzedakah. They have a big problem, whatever the issue is. There's a famine, there's a decree. They get the whole community together in the shul. They have a fast maybe, and they say everyone in the community has to give, $100 to charity. It's a communal responsibility. So notnin, you have to give it, right? You have to pay because you're there in the city. You can't not give it. Rashi explains that otherwise people will be choshed that you're not going to give it. Kishehein ba'in, when you are leaving the city, right? I have a place, yeah. Mevian ota imahem, you take the money with you. Umefarnasim ba b'nei Iran, you should get b'nei aniyei Iran. You should give it to people back home. So they said, give $100. I don't live in this city. I want to take the money home and give it to poor people where I live. So you should give the money to the Gabbai Tzedakah so that you're part of everybody else. But then when you're ready to leave, go to the Gabbai Tzedakah and say, I'm going back home. Can I have my $100 back so I can give it to poor people in my community? Tanya Namiyachi, in fact, the Breita says this explicitly. If you have people from one city who go to another city, who pasku alehem tzedakah, and they make a collection that everybody has to give, notnin, they have to give the charity, because when they're leaving the city, they bring it with them. That's by a group, right? However, a yachid, if a yachid goes to another city, they should give it to the people in that city. So again, it's really unclear exactly what's different. It seems from our Gemara that it depends on whether it's one person or many people. Right? That if you're an individual and you're living in a city and visiting a city, then you should give it to that city where you're in. But if it's a group of people, then they should take it back home when they leave the city and go back home. Rav Huna Gazar Tanita. Rav Huna wants to create a Tanit. There was a family, there was something wrong, right? He made a Tanit. All the Gaber Reb Chana bar Chanilai v'chol bnei Matya. Reb Chana bar Chanilai and all the people of his village, let's assume Rav Huna was in a bigger city, but there was a village, say, of 20 people outside, and they all came to be part of the fast, right? It was a communal thing. They were part of the greater metropolitan area, I guess, and they all came to join the fast. Ramu alayut tzedakah, so they announced everyone's got to give tzedakah, which is how they used to do it, right? Everyone has to give X amount of money. V'yavu bey, they gave it to him. They gave it. Kibol the mate, when they were getting ready to go home, Amrulais, they said to Rav Huna, Notes for Lanmar, can you give us back our money, please? We'll pay, we're going to give the poor people in our city. We're going to support them. Amar Lahu, Rav Huna said, sorry, I can't give it back. Tanina, because we learned in the Braita, the medvar memurim, that you give the money back to spend at home, kishein sham chaver ir. That's only if you don't have a chaver ir. Rashi says is a talmid chacham who is in charge of providing for the city, a gabbai tzedakah who's very well accepted. Aval yesham chaver ir tinatein the chaver ir. If you have someone who's sort of the central collection of the city, and probably the issue here is that you trust them, that they're giving it out and they're being responsible for all the people, then you should give it to that person. The Kol Shekain, says Rav Huna, the Aniyei Didi Udidchu Alai Samicho. Says Rav Huna, I'm part of your greater metropolitan area. The poor people in your city, in your village, and in my city all rely on me, so that they come and collect money from me as well. And so because I am what's called a chaver ir, I'm a central repository of tzedakah, all the tzedakah goes through me. And so the rule is that you only give the money back if you're sort of like independent kind of balei tzedakah based on each community, and then you would give the money to go back. I would say that this, halachically speaking, the Rishonim talk about this at a great length as to what's your responsibility of giving charity. I think it seems like it was much more, it's not argument. Like Maran Baba Basra goes through in great detail the responsibilities of every city to support the poor people in its city, right? And there's something called a kupa, which was every week, I think, you'd have to give money, and there was something called a tamchoy, which was every day. And so they used to have structures in every city of providing food and clothing as necessary for everybody in the city, and it was a communal responsibility, right? Obviously, something which doesn't quite apply as much in our communities, though you can debate that. But the question of where you give your tzedakah, and whether if you're in a city, you have to give tzedakah to that city is debated at great detail. And I just wanted to share there's a Mordechai.
I never do on Saturday.
Not me. There's a Mordechai, I think here, I read it in the Rev, in the tour, but there's a Mordechai who's quoted as talking about the question of what do you do about Yiskar, about what happens when Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur was specifically talked about. This was, Mordechai was like 13th century in Germany or France, I think Germany. I'm pretty sure Germany. Anyways, what do you do when people come for Yiskar? Because he writes, obviously on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, all the people would come to the big shul, right? They'd come from their villages, and they would come to the main town for the holiday. And it's customary, I guess not Rosh Hashanah, but Yom Kippur, it's customary, with Yiskar, it's customary to say you're going to give charity, or Kol Nidre appeal, I guess they had. And, the question is where do you take that charity back home with you when you go back home? And so he has a whole discussion about whether it's considered to be a one-time thing in response to an event, meaning if you're in a city and there's a famine and they need money, then it should go to that city. But if it's something that you do because of the prayer, which is Yiskar's example, you're giving it as aliyah for the neshama, and you do it every year, then you should use that money back home and give the charity to your own community.
So don't you're davening somewhere else, not in your home.
So people live in a small village. They went to a big city to daven.
Right, but you shouldn't give for the appeal. You should wait.
So you said, well, you don't give the appeal on Yom Kippur anyway, right? But
I mean, you shouldn't give money. You shouldn't.
So what he's saying in the case of Yiskar, he has a whole discussion because it's something that's done consistently, that it's meant to be understood as doing it on your own, basically. Which is again the difference between a rabbin and a yachid that we just had, right? So if you're an individual, we said you give it in that city. If you're a group, you can give it when you have to give it, and then you bring it back home with you. So that's how he paskins la halacha.
How do you bring it back home if you gave it?
You get it back. Meaning, if it, well, not a Yom Kippur, but if it's on a fast day.
He's gonna give you your money, but so they have to give you your money back, huh?
Correct. And that's
Yeah,
the case.
give
with
it.
fast day.
Why don't you just say, I'm not giving it to you, because why do you have to go through this whole?
So Rashi says on Amud Aleph that the reason is, Rashi says we're afraid it's going to look suspicious. If everyone's lining up to give money and a bunch of people are not giving it, people are going to think they didn't want to pay money. They're not participating. So you got to give the money and then get it back so you can take it back home. And obviously, if people are not lining up to give it, it wouldn't apply. Okay, let's continue. We're on the third line on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Bet. The next case was Ein Mochinet Shel Rabim Liyachid. You shouldn't sell a shul that belongs to a Rabim to an individual. Let's say you have an individual who wants to have a shul in their house or a Beit Knesset that they daven in themselves. You shouldn't sell it from a Rabim to a Yachid. You're going down in Kedusha. Devar Rabbi Meir, right? Probably because, we'll see in the Gemara, because a tzibur, of course, can say Hallel, say Kaddish, sorry, they read the Torah. Yachid doesn't do any of that. And Amru Lo, so the Chachamim said back to him in the Mishnah, in Cain, Aflo Mir Gdola, the Yerktana. So then you also can't give it from a big city to a small city, right? Because it's going to be less Kedusha. Shaper Kamalei Rabbanan Rabbi Meir. Says, well, that's a good answer for Rabbanan to Rabbi Meir, that you can never sell it. Rabbi Meir would say, no, the Yergdola, the Yerktana, from a big city to a small city, right? Then let's say we're talking about a Torah, for example. Then Meikar Kedusha, Shanami Kedusha. Originally it was used for Kedusha, now it's still used for Kedusha. But Mei Rabim Liyachid like a Kedusha. Once you go from a community to an individual, you no longer have a mitzvah of a Rabbim. You don't have the same level of Kedusha. Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan said, you're right, but if you're really so worried about these incremental levels of Kedusha, you should worry from a big shul to a small shul, because we still have a principle that the more people, the better. And so clearly, to that extent, we are not limiting you from selling it. And say the Chachamim, it would be okay. Finally, not finally, well, almost finally, yes. Says the Mishnah, Ein mochrin beit hakneset el al t'nai. You can never sell a beit hakneset, even if you have permission to, even the permissions we talked about before. You can only do it unless you make a condition in the sale, Shem yirtzu yachsiru, Rabbi Meir, that if we want to buy it back, we can buy it back. Rashi says, I think Rashi says, maybe Tosa says. No, Rashi says. Someone says. Yeah, Rashi says. The reason is that it looks bad. It looks like if you're selling a Beit Knesset to someone for whatever reason. Remember, you can sell it as long as you have permission from Shivat Tovei Ha'ir. We said you could sell it even for a store or a house or anything. But you have to put a clause in there saying, if we as a community want to buy it back, we can buy it back, because we don't want it to look like we're done. We don't care about the shul anymore. We recognize for whatever reasons we have to sell it. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough people. We're not using it anymore. But should the circumstances change, we'll buy it back. And so you have to insert that clause in every sale of a Beit Knesset, according to Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim omrim, no, don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. You can sell it for a forever sale. There's only four things you cannot sell a Beit Knesset for. One is for a merchatz, for a bathhouse. Borski, which is where they used to process skins, hides, which is a famously smelly endeavor. L'tfila, you can't make it into a mikvah, which is similar to a merchatz, I guess. Well, a beit hamayim, Rashi is not clear. Beit hamayim, he says, might mean a laundromat, right? That's where they had a lot of water, or it might be a urinal, which are both called beit hamayim, I guess. But those things you can't sell it for. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mochrin oto l'shem chatzer. You don't have to ask the person what they're doing with it. Sell your shul, and they'll do it. They'll use the property. And halokeach mashi yirtzeh yaseh. Whoever buys it can do whatever they want with it. There's no, maybe you shouldn't sell it on condition that it becomes a bathhouse, but you sell it for whatever the person wants to do with it, and they can make it a bathhouse if they want to. Now, ask the Gemara, beginning of the Gemara, according to Rabbi Meir, right? Every time you sell a shul, you have to put a clause in it saying we can buy it back, right? On condition we can buy it back. Let's say 3 years pass and we sell you a shul for $1 million, right? 3 years pass and you decide the shul comes back and says we want to buy it back, and they give you back your $1 million, right? And they get their shul, right? So ask the Gemara, the Rabbi Meir, Hechi Dariba. How could someone live in that shul? How do they ribbit? It's interest, right? I basically gave you $1 million. I thought I was buying a shul. I lived in it for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, you come back, give me the $1 million back, and you move back in. So I got $1 million back that I lent you, and I lived here for 3 years. So why isn't that interest? Amr Yochanan, well, Rabbi Meir b'shitat Rabbi Yehuda Amra. Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar tzad echad b'ribit mutar. Rabbi Yehuda has an opinion. We'll get to this in great detail in Bava Metzia, that tzad echad b'ribit is mutar. What does that mean? So remember, ribit usually means I lend you $100 and I say you got to pay me back 110, right? That's interest. But in that condition, we're both in on the deal, meaning I lent you the money, you got to pay it back to me. In this case, there's only ribit if one person wants that to happen, basically. Meaning, I sold you, I bought the shul, right? I can't go back to you in 3 years and say, I don't like the shul anymore. I want my money back, right? So I can't undo the deal. The people who sold me the shul had put a clause in that if they want to get it back, they can get it back. So they are allowed to do that. But since it's only in the hands of one group, not of both sides, meaning it wasn't a mutual condition, then therefore there's no interest considered in that case at all. And it's totally permissible according to this understanding. It's not what we're going to say later, but that's this understanding. The Tanya, and where do you have that? Where do you have that in a Braita? Let's say, right? Let's say I owe someone, I owe James $100,000, okay? 100, let's say. And he comes to me, so I borrow $100,000 from him, and he's a little nervous, I'm not going to pay him back. So I make him oselo sadeo mecher. I turn my field, I have a field worth $100,000, and I give it to James as a purchase, basically. And the condition we say is, right, that if I don't pay you back the $100,000, you get to keep the field, okay? So I get 2 years, let's say. So says the Braita, bisman shemocher ochel perot mutar. If the seller, meaning me, who's also the borrower, eats all the food that grows on this field, then it's okay. Because then James didn't get anything extra from having this field, unless I default on the loan, in which case he gets the field, right? But if the person who bought it, meaning the lender, eats the perot, then it's a sort. Because then James is going to get his money back plus the fruit of the field. And that's considered to be interest, okay? Rabbi Yehuda says, that's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, afilu lokeach uchal perot mutar. Even if the person who is lokeach, even if the lender who bought the field eats the perot, it's mutar. Even though, let's say 2 years from now, I don't pay back the loan. So then James is going to get the field. So right, well, that's not a problem. Let's say 2 years from now, I do pay back the loan, right? I pay back $100,000. So I borrowed $100,000. I paid back $100,000. And James got this beautiful field full of apples for 2 years for free. So that's considered interest. Says Rabbi, that's not a problem. And the reason it's not a problem is that it's not in his hands to make it into a loan, right? Meaning I can either pay back the loan, in which case there is interest, or I can give him the field. If I give you the field, it means you bought the field on day one, basically. Your $100,000 bought this field. And so because it's only tzad echad b'ribit, it's permissible. And says Rabbi Yehuda, in fact, ma'aseh beitut ben zonin, she'asa sadeo mecher al pi Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that this once happened with a person, beitus ben zonin, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said it's okay. And the buyer, meaning the lender, ate the fruits. Amrulo, they said to him, Misham Raya, mocher ochel perot hu haya belokeach. That was wrong. You got the facts wrong. In fact, the one who sold it, meaning the borrower, kept eating the fruit. And so the lender never got anything besides his $100,000. My benayo, says the Gemara, tzad echad b'ribit ika benayo. The machloka between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is this case of tzad echad b'ribit, where basically there's a chance that it's a sale, in which case it would be fine. There's a chance it's a loan, but it's in one person's hands to decide which one. And therefore, since it's not mutual, it's not considered to be ribit. Mar savar tzad echad b'ribit mutar, mar savar tzad echad b'ribit asur. Now Rava says, I completely disagree. The kuli alma tzad echad b'ribit asur. Everyone agrees that it's asur. If I borrow from you, I borrow $100,000 from James again, and he then takes my field because in case I don't pay him back, and for 2 years he eats the fruit of the field, and then at the end of 2 years I pay him back $100,000, that's ribbit, that's interest, because I gave him a loan back and I gave him extra money. And everyone would agree with that. Hacha ribit amanat lahachzirika beinayim. Here the question is, what if we made a condition at the beginning saying, I owe you $100,000, here's my field. If I don't pay you back, you purchase the field. If I pay you back at the end of 2 years, then I get my field back. Plus, you're going to pay me for everything that you took from this field for the last 2 years. So you'll pay me back. So that's called ribit amanat lahachzir. Because when you got the stuff, got the extra fruit, right, it was considered to be interest. You're going to give it back to me. That's the question. Is that prohibited or not? Mar savar ribit amanat lahachzir mutar, umar savar asur. The machloket is, even if you give it back, according to the Tanakama, it would still be prohibited. Because at the time that you collected the fruit, basically, you still were owed the principal, plus you were getting extra. So the fact that you're going to pay it off later doesn't change the fact that it was interest. And so since it was still extra above the principal, it would be prohibited, and Rabbi Yehuda says that would be okay. And that's what we'd have to understand in our Mishnah. So that's the Tanakama. That's Rabbi Meir. Continues the Gemara, the last narrow line. The Chachamim Omrim, the rabbis say, you can sell a Beit Knesset forever, but there's 4 things you can't sell it for. And the 4th one was what did we say? It was a
Hamayim.
Beit Hamayim, thank you. Which probably meant, like I said, a place where people urinate, a urinal. So Amr Rabbi Yehuda Amr Shmuel, mutar l'adam lahashtin mayim b'toch 4 amot shel tefillah. A person is allowed to urinate within 4 amot of where they pray. So even if you pray in a place, you could then, obviously later, urinate within 4 amot of that place. Amr Rav Yosef, Michael Mashron, what's the chiddush? Tanina. Our Mishnah says, at the end of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mochrin oto l'shum chatzer, that you can sell a shul for a courtyard. The guy who buys it, you can do whatever they want. If they want to turn it into a place where you urinate or you're in a bathroom, you can do it. The Rabbanan, Loka Amri, the Rabbanan only said Ela Beit Knesset, that the only place you can't make a bathroom is in the same place that was a Beit Knesset, the Kavia Kedushate, Avo Arba Amad. But if you go 4 amot away from the Beit Knesset, right, the Lokvia Kedushatayo, it's not a place of Kedusha, there would be no prohibition. So first of all, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't even care what you turn the Beit Knesset into, but everybody agrees that if you walk away from the Beit Knesset 4 amot, you can have a bathroom. So there's, again, they didn't, as you know, light in bathrooms, right? They would just urinate.
Hoch dalet amot within, or you mean 4 amot and out and beyond?
No, I'm sorry. Within 4 amot of the Beit Knesset, but it's not Kedusha. It's not the Beit Knesset. It's just next to the Beit Knesset. So there's no prohibition. Only the Beit Knesset itself. But with 4 amot, which is not the Kedusha of the Beit Knesset, there'd be no problem urinating against the side. Maybe not against the Beit Knesset, but on the side right next to it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman. Now, there was a Tana who quoted in front of Rav Nachman, Hamitpalel, let's say a person finishes davening and they have to urinate, Marchik Arba Amot Umashtim. They should go 4 amot away from the place. Let's say you're standing in the middle of, again, not in a shul, which is a whole different issue, but you're in the public, right? You're out in the field and you finish praying, and you have to urinate, you should go 4 amot away and then be mashtim. And furthermore, hamashtim, someone who first urinates, then should be marchik arba amot u'mitpalel. They should go 4 amot away and pray. They shouldn't pray in the exact same spot. So Amrali said to him, I don't understand why not. I understand that if you first urinate in a place, you should not daven right there, because Tanina, it says in the bright in Brachot, Kama yarchik mehem uminat so'a arba amot. Right? How far should you go away from urine and so'a? 4 amot. Why, if you pray somewhere, do you have to then, once you're finished praying, right? Let's say you're standing on the side of a road. You pray mincha, and then you've got to urinate. Why can't you just urinate in the same place? And if that was true, the whole Narda would be off limits to go to the bathroom, because people have davened everywhere. In every corner of Narda, someone stopped to daven mincha once, right? I guess it was a small place. And so now you're telling me that any place a person davens, you can't go to the bathroom. It would make it very problematic if you're going to the bathroom in Narda.
The entire throughway up to the Catskills.
Exactly. Tani So it says that no, what he meant was yisheh. No. Not that you have to go 4 amot away. You should wait the amount of time it takes to go 4 amot. Wait 20 seconds. Don't just urinate or daven right after you've done that. Right? It says, well, why is that? We're at the first of the wide lines. I get that someone who finishes urinating, we should wait 20 seconds, right? Because there are drops. It's not clear exactly what the drops are. It might be that the drops in the ground still haven't been absorbed, so there's still urine. Rashi says it might be on your clothes. So walk a little bit, spend a little time to rub it off, to get it off, so it's not there. Why when you daven, do you have to wait arba amot to go to urinate? Let's say you finish shmones or you finish tefillah, again, assuming you're not wearing tefillin, whatever the thing is, why you just go to the bathroom right away? You were waiting the whole time, you got to go to the bathroom. Why? Amar Ravashi says, well, the reason is that as everybody knows, kol arba amot tfilatos durabipiv. Your mind is in your tefillah, right? You've concentrating. Sadur means you ordered your thoughts, what you're going to pray to Hashem for. As soon as you finish your tefillah, you're still thinking about everything you were thinking about during tefillah, right? Your tefillah is still going on in your head. It takes some time to decompress or to come away from it. And so because of that, Arba Amot is not a long distance, right? It's a few feet. But for a few seconds, your tefillah is still in your head, and rechushi merachshin siftata. Your lips are still sort of moving and talking about your tefillah. And so, even when you finish saying the words, you're not quite done. And so you should give it a little bit of time before you actually go to the bathroom. Again, just a few seconds, but you should give it a little bit of an interruption, a break between finishing tefillah and urinating.
Would Aleinu count?
Aleinu would count. Unless you Aleinu too, but yeah, I assume Aleinu would count. Let's do a couple more lines. I'm a little tempted to stop. I'm going to do a few more lines if that's okay. Okay, even though hopefully, yes. Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Zakkai. The Talmidim asked Rabbi Zakkai, we're going to have a whole order, so come tomorrow morning. I think we're doing 7:30. I'm sorry if you can't make it, Miriam. 7:30 tomorrow morning. A continued discussion as to why people live a long time. So I would advise everyone not to miss this stuff, okay? Though the Rabbeinu Hanano says, I'll just quote him, upshutotain. They're all obvious, all these reasons why people live a long time. So he doesn't think there's anything earth-shattering here. But anyways, we're going to learn some of this. So Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Zakkai, b'mea rachta yamim. Why were you zochet to live a long time? Or how does a person be zochet to live a long time? Amar lahem, he said, miyamai lo shtanti mayim b'toch arba amot shel tefillah. I was always careful never to urinate within 4 amot of where I prayed. So I had a lot of respect for tefillah. I never made up like a nickname or an unpleasant name for someone else. Like I never was mitvazeh, I never embarrassed a person by calling them some other name. And I never skipped Kiddush on Shabbos. I was always very, very careful to make sure I had enough wine for Kiddush. Ima zikena, when I was a kid, I had this elderly mother. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but elderly mother. And pamachat machra kippah sheberosha. Once she, because she knew how important it was to me, I'm not sure she might have lived a long time too. She sold her kippah sheberosha, her hat, her scarf on her head, the vili kiddush hayom, and she used the money to buy me kiddush. So it was a tremendous value in my family to be makbid on having enough wine for kiddush. Obviously, they were very poor initially. Tana, and in fact, the Braita taught Kishemeita, when his old mother died, Henichulo shalosh meot garvei yayin. She left him 300 barrels of wine. So she obviously got richer. I guess it was when she was young, she was poor. And Kishemei too, but by the time he died, Heniach lebanav shloshet alafim garvei yayin. He left his children 3,000 barrels of wine. So that both aspects are true, right? Tosas points out, I think here, that they say if you're Zahir in Kiddush Hayom, you get rewarded by having a lot of wine. So they were big, they turned this into a big vineyard.
What's the minimum amount you need for Kiddush?
Revere?
And how many of those are in a
I don't know.
3,000 barrels?
Right, a lot. But I'm saying clearly, so the way Tosas understands is that she was rewarded. There was a point in their lives where they were dirt poor, and she had to sell the covering on her head or a scarf on her head to buy a bottle of wine for Kiddush. But then she obviously got richer. And when she died, she left him 300 barrels and he multiplied it in his lifetime. So we should all be zocha. Maybe we'll stop here. So we're like 6 lunch on the bottom. We'll pick it up tomorrow morning, God willing, at 7:30. I hope everyone can join. It's another fun daf. And Shavua Tov.
Shavua
Shavua
Tov. Thank you, Ellie.